Hello and welcome. I hope you're all very well under the circumstances. My name's Jon Capleton. I'm a technical specialist covering Europe, and I'm broadcasting this from my house in London, not above the world, where we, like a lot of people, are still in lockdown. So just want to say thank you for joining me, and I'll be giving a little introduction to Bifrost today, and just talking generally, very generally, a high-level view of Bifrost. I'm just going to introduce myself as well. My slide's not working like it should. Let's try that. Okay. Sorry, there's somebody knocking at my door trying to deliver something. Yes, so I have joined Autodesk about 2 years ago, but before that, I've been living and working at DNEG for the last 10 years or so, and I had various sorts of roles from there. So I was a generalist to start with, and then I went to be a supervisor and went into management in the end. And I was looking after about anywhere between 60 and 100 people at any one time. But before that, I was at MPC, and before that, I was at Framestore. So I've been in and around the sort of the major studios for about 14, 15 years or something like that. But before that, I was a model maker, so I used to make the things by hand on film sets as well. So I've been around for a while. Just thought I'd show you a couple of films I've been working on. There's some pretty good ones, then some not so good ones. I guess my favorite one was Fantastic Beasts. Yeah, but that's enough about me. I'm going to go and talk about Bifrost. I'm just going to show you this very briefly. It's a safe harbor statement. Basically, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's coming from Bifrost in the future. So what I'm going to say with this statement is basically don't base any purchasing decisions on what I'm about to say on this about Bifrost in the future. That's just because it could change, okay? But that's the kind of legal bit out of the way and done. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of the evolution of Bifrost. Kind of the reason I'm going to do this, there's a little confusion about Bifrost, and it's kind of useful to know where it's been and where we are now and where we are heading in the future. So at the beginning, Autodesk acquired Exotic Matter back in 2013, and they acquired this application called Naiad. Now, Naiad was all about liquid simulation. It was presented at SIGGRAPH in 2010. People got really excited about it. It ended up in some sort of high-profile films like Avatar and Pirates of the Caribbean. But it was a really complicated system. It was a node-based system, but the average user had a kind of a hard time wrapping their heads around that system. So when Autodesk acquired Naiad and some of the developers, they effectively locked them away and asked them to recreate the functionality of Naiad in Maya, and that is what became Bifrost. So Bifrost is not Naiad per se, but I guess you would call it a parent, or it spawned Bifrost. So Bifrost 1 ships with Maya 2015, and its initial focus is all about liquid simulation. So things like waves of water, pools of water, rivers of water, just all different types of, so something going on there. Okay, yes, all sorts of different types of water. And then we tied a bow in it and ported it over to Max in 2018. So I've lost my place there a little bit. So basically, all the time we were developing that water system, we were also developing underneath it a general procedural platform that just hadn't been exposed yet. So that's what we have now, and that's what Bifrost extension is. So all of that is now exposed. So in order to differentiate between those two, we still have the Bifrost fluids, which is the liquid simulation stuff, but now we have the Bifrost extension, which is the more open system. And just hit that. Okay, thank you. I thought something popped up there. Right, so let's get that out of the way. Thank you very much for letting me know that. Okay, so what that means is that Bifrost has been decoupled from Maya, and Maya has become a plugin. So we have a separate installer And there's, so if you choose to, the slides are working now. That's better. So you can choose to install Bifrost or not. It's a bit like Arnold in that respect. And we also went for a separate beta program too. So similar to Arnold, you can evaluate a beta version of Bifrost and a production version of Maya. So for example, you can have a 2018 installed and then evaluate the latest Bifrost without having to do the beta version of Maya. So all of that is really to allow for fast-paced development, and it effectively allows us to change the engines on the plane without landing. So yeah, fast speed development of Bifrost. Okay, so Bifrost is now a general purpose procedural content creation system. So it's not just for liquids, as I said, it's for a very wide range of things. It's node-based. It's actually a visual programming environment with nodes and connections. So you can essentially write scripts or codes in a visual environment. So Maya is essentially a host application for Bifrost. So Bifrost is living in Maya. Maya sees Bifrost, but Bifrost doesn't necessarily see Maya. Okay. So you can hook into the graph via outliner or via viewport. With manipulators, or you can even color per vertex into the graph, and you can get that information into the graph that way. So the nodes themselves can get quite complex. We have this concept of compounds, and we can take that complex set of graphs and essentially compile them into these compounds. So stay in this sort of node-based visual programming world, and they're editable, scriptable, and at the moment of evaluation, they get JIT compiled, and JIT means just in time. So they get compiled at the last minute very, very quickly to the equivalent C++ code. So it's as though you're writing a C++ program without having to know C++. Okay. So that's the sort of the basic fundamentals, but I just wanted to speak to you briefly about packs. So with the first edition of Bifrost extension, we have the core pack of compounds, and I guess you could call these the building blocks. So where you could build almost any compound that you can think of. So along with that core pack, in the first episode release, we have the effects pack too, which I'll kind of expand on a little bit in a second, but future releases will be focusing on things like world building and character packs as well. And those will be sort of focusing on specific set of problems and telling a set of compounds to those as solutions. We also have this thing called the Rebel Pack as well. You can download this now. Lots of useful compounds in it. It's not supported by us at the moment, but it's a useful way to see what's coming in the future of Bifrost compounds. Okay. So we've initially focused on, get my slides going, good. We've initially focused on character-driven effects with that first edition. These are kind of effects compounds that you can just drag and drop into your scene and just get going with it. So you don't have to build these from scratch, they're already built, and you can get in there and just change the settings and play around to your heart's content. It's actually a very good way to learn. The solvers, the new solvers in Bifrost are pretty unique as well. So in Bifrost, we have the next gen multi-physics solver called the NPM, and that stands for the material point method. And that's not a new algorithm that's been around, it's been around since about the 50s or so. And they used to use it to scientifically model the results of nuclear explosions. If you can hear some shouting and screaming, that's my kids next door. I told them to be quiet. So the NPM solver can create lots of different types of effects. So too many to really put into one single graph, but suffice to say, all these effects can be driven together in one simulation NPM node. So all these different sources can work together without any extra input from the user. So here we have snow, sand, cloth, fiber, and fluid, all going into the simulate NPM node, and they're all in there and interacting between each other, and there's nothing extra that you have to do for that to happen. Okay, so here's an example of those different materials coming together and being solved as one. So we've got the sand and snow coming together and hitting the cloth, and that's all solved in one solver. And it's the weight of the sand and the snow that rips that cloth as it goes through. Okay, just a few more examples of NPM in action. Well, it's really great, and it came from the Disney's Frozen originally. You see the snowball on the left-hand side there, and it has this just wonderful rigid body dynamics coupled with that sort of particle effect as well. It's not that, it's the NPM solver in action. And it's also good for liquids. When I say liquids, I would say quite viscousy liquids. So in this case, it's a bit snot, but if you were to do water, you'd stick to the original Bifrost system. Okay, like I said, it's a physically based solver. So the avalanche here on the right has been triggered by that little snowman, and okay. So NPM is also good at cloth. So here we have, so so we have this cloth in the middle, which is kind of the high geo in the middle. And so if we just open up the graph editor there, so the input there, that's the cloth geometry in the middle. And we just need to take that and turn that into an NPM cloth. And we're going to constrain that cloth to those two bars either side. So simply just go and grab the cube 1 and cube 2, drag them and drop them into the graph, and just simply hook them into the constraint geometry node. And then, of course, we need to simulate that. So we've got the simulate NPM node there. And each time you do this, you need to put the settings node into the simulate NPM node. And this is true for everything, not just cloth. And of course, we're putting that geometry through quite a lot of stress. I'm just going to put an update mesh normals node in there just to make sure the normals are doing what they want to do. And that's it. That's a very simple setup. And of course, we just go down to the right-hand side, press play, and that just starts the simulation. And obviously, it's been a simulation. I'll just speed this up and do a quick play blast. And there we go. You know, it's a very simple, very quick setup, but it kind of demonstrates that, you know, how good it is to do something very quick and simple and out of the box as well. Okay, I'm just going to move on. So as well as the cloth solver, there's the fiber solver as well. So this is not a cloth solver, it's a fiber solver. So what it's doing is solving every single one of those pieces of fiber. And that knit has been procedurally produced in Bifrost using strands. So, so that's been using the NPM's fiber solver. Sorry, my watch is talking to me now. Okay, so that just brings me nicely onto strands. I just want to mention these very quickly. These are great. These are brilliant. If you were a soft image ice user, you'll probably recognize these. Here are some kind of early tests with the strands. And somebody on the beta forum created a plat generator using the strands, which is interesting. But they can be really used for some nice things. So this is an example of not only strands, but strands around strands. And you can also instantiate down the length of the strand. So what we've done here is model one chain link and then have that instantiated down the length of the strand. The animation is driven by a velocity field as well in Bifrost, and that's part of that Rebel pack as well that I mentioned earlier. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the error solver, just to separate it out a little bit. It creates smoke, fog, mist, and vapor, and that kind of stuff. And if you've used biofluids before, then you could kind of compare it to that if you like. But it has a much more improved accuracy, and it's integrated with the Viewport 2 and Arnold. But the most important thing that I want to stress with this, it is adaptive. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So here we have one of the key differences is that it sets better boundary conditions. So that's old Maya fluids there, and this is the new Bifrost Aero. Okay, so the better boundary conditions, you can see the difference between the old fluids and the new fluids. It's just kind of pushing the smoke around versus the Bifrost solution. But what it does to do that is it has a higher order of math to solve these different effects. So you're going to get a lot more detail, a lot more push, a lot more sort of that liquid simulation through there. It's the same down at the bottom there. So the right-hand side is the Bifrost Aero there. So you're getting a lot of extra detail created without any extra input or effects trickery needed from the user. Okay. So I just want to talk very briefly about adaptivity in the aero solder. So some of that extra detail and accuracy comes from a higher order of maths that the aero solver is using. So that also comes with longer solve times. So higher order of maths means more calculations mean longer solve times. However, we overcome that with adaptive sampling. So what that means is we can create resolution for the simulation where it is needed. So we can vary that resolution in that geometry as you're about to see in back here. So next bit, so we've got, so we want the resolution, we have two boxes here. So we have the resolution at the back and middle and the front there. So you can see the different resolution as it comes through. So you can set that resolution to be closer to the camera. So here we are closer to the camera with a higher resolution as it flies through the different boxes. You can also sort of mix resolutions as well. And you could have a pre-roll, so lower resolution at your pre-roll, and then when it hits your numbers, you want a high resolution. And you can set the resolution to be close, facing the camera. So the smoke behind is low and facing the camera is high. So basically that just allows us to create really dense, kind of heavily populated scenes. Okay. So one of these bikes has adaptive sampling and one does not. I still don't know which one is which, but I'll show the numbers on what it is. So with that adaptive sampling, you get 20% less voxels. It's kind of 22% faster, and it's a third smaller on a file size. So okay, that's a pretty good saving when you take that over a sequence. Yeah. So that now brings me on to the combustion solver. It's very similar to the aero solver. It's similar in the way that the aero solver is the sort of the next generation solver for doing fluids, but the combustion solver is the same thing when it comes to combustion. So we're able to, at this point, to simulate real-world physical combustion reactions. So it's based on computational chemistry and thermodynamics. So the fire and the combustion that it creates are physically based in reality. So it produces water and vapor and it comes up with some very, very realistic results. But very importantly, like the aero solver, it's adaptive as well. So being physically and chemically real, you can have presets as well. So you could reasonably expect to go on set and ask the pyrotechnic guy or special effects guy what fuel they're using and in what quantity and for what given burn. So you could go back into Bifrost, pick the right presets and expect to get very similar results just straight off the bat. If you don't have a preset, then you can, because perhaps it's an exotic fuel or it's not widely used, you can potentially find those numbers out, what fuel it is, and then just type them in. And again, expect to get a very similar result. So here's a large volume of methane, very similar to what they've been using on the film Backdraft. Okay, so same as the aero solver, like I said, the combustion solver is adaptive. In this example, we have an animated camera on the right-hand side. If I press play on it, and you'll see the box on the right-hand side, and as it moves through, it's shown where you want to have that resolution in the camera. So again, this is slightly exaggerated to illustrate my point, but if you look at the numbers, the savings are huge. So you go from 73 gig file size down to 5 gig which is a big saving. Okay. So I covered that very quickly. It's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what's been happening there. I'm just going to talk very briefly about what's to come in future episodes. So I'm excited about this one. Personally, this is what I used to do a lot of, but it's a procedural world building. So we're looking to generate mesh and volumetric terrain generation. And instancing is very powerful in Bifrost, so we'll be utilizing that very heavily. This is an example of what that might look like. I mean, it's not out there yet. It's been developed at the moment. So this is a high-level instancing node kit, and this can be used for scattering trees and rocks on a train or something like that, or tiles across a roof, or balconies, or even cars in a parking lot. So technical artists can assemble nodes from the node kit and produce rule-based looks, and those looks can be very easily changed just with a few tweaks or parameters, and you can have a whole new world. So that's the real benefit of procedural world building. Okay, just a few examples. Roland showed this earlier. This is entirely made in Bifrost as well, apart from the sky. That's not in Bifrost, but the rest of it's all created in Bifrost. Same with this image here as well. And this one here, this is new out, done by our artist, Andrew. And everything in here is created by Bifrost, except for one thing, which is the one blade of grass, which has been brought in, and he's instantiated that across the whole scene many, many times over. So to show you what that looks like, this is the graph that created that scene, and you have sort of four main areas that have been used. So you're building the terrain procedurally, and then you're scattering the rocks and scattering very many different things over the top of that. Okay, so something I wanted to mention as well, which I came across the other day, is with the recent release of Maya 2020, and with Roland showing you the remesh and retopo tools a little bit earlier, you can do a proceduralized remeshing. So I just want to share that with you very quickly. This is a personal project that I've been working on. Now, a friend of mine, Jake Burstein, he's a sort of character sculptor from DNEG. He gave me this beautiful sculpt of a female samurai, and it cost about consisting of about 6.5 million polys. So obviously you can't use this model as it stands right now, so it needs to be retopoed. And if you were going to do that with hand techniques or hand retopo techniques, it would take weeks, maybe even months. There's a lot of interpenetrating geometry, making it impossible to use the Maya's new remesh and retopo tools straight off the bat. But there's a technique that you can use using Bifrost that can make this procedurally automate some of that process and make it a lot faster. So say if I wanted to retopo this shoulder pad, this is comprised of many different pieces. What I could do is grab all of those and combine them into one bit of geometry, and then drag and drop that straight into the Bifrost graph. And all I would have to do is attach a convert to volume node, and that takes that geometry and converts it to a volume, like it says on the tin. Now, after that, I could hook that into a dual contour dual marching cubed node. Now, funny name aside, that generates a Bifrost mesh from the volume that we made. Okay, and then we can just output that to Maya. But that's a Bifrost mesh back in Maya, but to work on it, you need to turn that back into a Maya mesh. So we can do that by taking the Bifrost node into the node editor, adding a Bifrost Geo to Maya node, and hooking that into the shape node, and voila, it's back in Maya again as a very clean one piece of mesh. And at this point, you can just do a remesh and retopo, and this is the final result. So you've taken that very complicated and very tricky piece of mesh, and that you've retopoed that, very quickly. And the beauty of it is that it being procedural, you can dial up or down that resolution, or how that mesh gets calculated. So effectively, you can control every step along the way. So Matt Chan from Autodesk did a very good tutorial and posted it on the area. So if you're interested in this process, I recommend you have a look at it. That's the thing at the bottom there, the link. I can send out a link in the Q&A in a minute if people would like that. Okay. Another thing to come is the character pack. Now people are getting very excited about this. And you can do a lot of things already using the core building block tools. So a lot of TDs are riggers, obviously very technical guys, and they've been playing already. But the goal is complete procedural rigging. So that's geo-independent rigging. And that will be a game changer for VFX when that happens. It's a little way off yet, so it's not there quite yet, but it will be here. But there is an area that's worth pursuing right away, and that's the creation of hybrid rigs. And that's rigs that are made with a mix of DG nodes and Bifrost graphs working together. And what that does is simplify the rig complexity in the node editor, so you can rapidly prototype new constraints or solvers and deformers without having to drop into C++ dev. Another thing to note here as well is that Bifrost graphs are treated just as regular DG nodes, so cache playback is supported as well. So just to quantify what I just said, here's an illustration of a graph simplification. Top graph is representing a shape in Maya after its first deformation, and it balloons to about 10 nodes with tweak deformers and bend deformers and group IDs and all that sort of stuff. And the bottom graph is the Bifrost node that takes care of all of that in just one node. So you're reducing that graph all the way down to 2 nodes, which is making it way simpler, but actually also faster too. Okay, like I said, a lot of technical guys have been jumping into the core building blocks and building their own stuff already, even though we told them it's not quite ready for you. They did it anyway, which is great. So Philip Czar here, he created this real-time collision deformer that reacts to the floor plane. Pranay's made, oh, let me press play on that one. He's already made a muscle system, which has this lovely jiggle to it, and Duncan's been doing some IK deformers. Okay. Oh, I see I'm running a bit late. Okay, just a quick word on rendering as well. What you see is what you get. So if you look at this image here, on the right-hand side is the rendering of what you see. On the left-hand side is what you see from Bifrost in the viewport. And that's with Arnold shaders. So there's very good pixel parity there. Another thing you need to know, you can send files from Bifrost straight to Arnold, and that's without caching or baking geometry. Now, as you know, caching and baking back into a scene again is a really big bottleneck. So you don't have to bring it back into Maya. You can send it straight to Arnold. JP is going to talk about, well, we can cover some of that in a minute. So, but basically you do this at render time with render time procedurals. And so, yes, rapid development. So we've been going very fast. So episode 1's been out. It's been out since SIGGRAPH, so nearly a year. The episode 2 is coming very shortly. So like I said, we're looking at scattering and all sorts of stuff like that. Other things that will be coming to multi-resolution fractures as well, and hydrosolvers. That may or may not come into Bifrost soon. Well, I'm not sure about that, but definitely XGen and grooming capabilities will be going that way as well, potentially, maybe not. I won't commit myself to that. But there's getting more and more learning material out there. It was a little scarce at first, but there's getting more and more. We have a lot of tutorials in the area, and that's where you'll find that Retopo tutorial. There's the My Learning channel, and there's a great guy called Bruce Lee. It's not his real name, but you'll recognize some of the stuff in here. He does some really fantastic tutorials. So if you search up Bruce Lee, he's got some fantastic tutorials. Okay, I've run out of time, so I'm sorry I can't really talk about this, but next time I'll talk about this. This is rather exciting stuff, but for the next time. Okay, right, well, thank you for listening to me. JP, I'm sorry if I've gone over the time. I'm gonna head back over to you.